Welcome to the SENDcast. My name is Dale Pickles, Managing Director of B Squared, and of course, the host of the SENDcast. If this is the first time you've listened to the SENDcast, then welcome, join us. Each week we talk about a different topic within the world of SEND to improve our knowledge, to provide support to professionals working in schools, and to empower parents. On this week's episode, I did a lot of learning because we discussed how to support students with OCD. And this is a completely new topic to me, so there's a lot of learning. And I was joined by Shaun Flores, a mental health advocate, consultant and facilitator. Shaun uses his lived experience to spark honest conversations around neurodiversity and well-being. Diagnosed with OCD and ADHD as an adult, Shaun brings his own personal insights and professional experience to the way he works with schools, universities and communities. B Squared is the company behind this podcast, and we've been helping schools since 1997. We've been breaking down curriculums and frameworks into smaller steps before P-levels ever existed. Connecting Steps, our assessment software, is our biggest product, and it can be used to help celebrate progress and show progress from a starting point for a wide range of students, and from the most complex to young people working towards independence. EverSense is our evidence for learning and parental communication tool, so really build that engaging parental communication. And then we have the SENDcast podcast and, of course, our SENDcast CPD sessions as well. And you can find out all about all our products on the B Squared website, or you can click on the meeting link in the show notes to book a meeting with me to take you through our products and how they can help you. Now, let's get on with that podcast. I am joined this week by Shaun Flores, a mental health advocate, consultant and facilitator. Shaun uses his lived experience to spark honest conversations about neurodiversity and well-being. Diagnosed with OCD and ADHD as an adult, Shaun brings his own personal insights and professional expertise to the way he works with schools, universities and communities. Welcome to the show, Shaun.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been an absolute honor and a pleasure to be able to come and speak about a topic which I genuinely think, even in the SEND population, in the SEND world, we still don't understand, let alone in wider society. So I'm massively grateful.
Well, we've been going for 5 years, and in 5 years, it's never been a topic. And so it is an episode I've been really looking forward to because I really don't know much about OCD, apart from what I've seen on TV, in the media. I'm not going to say things because they're probably wrong. So I probably know either a small part of what OCD is, or I've probably been taught lots of myths and misconceptions about what OCD is. So let's start right at the beginning. What is OCD?
Yes, so OCD is characterized as Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder. So it's known as having obsessions, which can be through different themes, for example. So some people may have obsessions such as the fear of hurting people, the fear of harming people, the fear of getting people sick, the fear of having the wrong kind of thoughts, the fear of numbers. And what happens as a result of that? They do compulsions to kind of get rid of those fears, to get rid of those obsessions. But what happens as time goes on is you just constantly teach your brain to be afraid of it. And the disordered part of it is when they start to really, they continue it and their world gets smaller and smaller. So obsessions, compulsions, which are typically the behaviors that people try to do to alleviate the obsessions that they're having. But what you have to teach your brain essentially is by doing those compulsions, you are not making your obsessions any better. You're supposed to treat them just like emptiness, so you're supposed to treat them like they don't really exist anymore. Or then obviously it's not that simple. I'm just breaking it down in a really black and white, explain what OCD typically is. We typically in wider society understand OCD to simply about cleaning and symmetry, and that's obviously because of shows such as Obsessive-Compulsive Cleaners, which was first aired on Channel 4, and several seasons later it's been baked into the public consciousness that's what they think OCD is. And I think in particular in the show, they presented OCD as something desirable, something for that people would want. You would want somebody with obsessive-compulsive disorder to come and clean your house. But if you actually sit down and spoke to those sufferers, it's not something you would particularly want, and it's not something.
It's interesting. one of the things I've seen with OCD is people talk about, if you get someone with OCD, it'll be really good working in a lab because they would do the same thing again and again, and it gives them comfort and they like doing it. They'll never make a mistake. And that's a really bad simplification, isn't it?
Absolutely it is, because that probably could be a bit more perfectionism. By no means am I a clinical expert, but the idea that something brings them comfort to some degree can be OCD. It's also the idea that you get this reducing of your anxiety, but what happens is, again, it comes back. It almost, in some ways, you could describe it as the tiger that keeps you at bay. It keeps you locked in. It keeps you really afraid. So that's quite often how we speak about OCD in a lot of the work. And yes, the idea that OCD is something that people want is completely wrong. I've worked on quite a few VR projects that have tried to simulate the experience of what it's like for someone to live with OCD. So those constant intrusive thoughts, the bodily sensations, the fears that just keep happening over and over, the obsessions that happen over and over and over, it's genuinely crippling. And when we base it on the statistics, we know that OCD affects about 1.2% of the population. So that means that's about 12 out of every 1,000 people are living with OCD, which is about 750,000 people in the UK. So that's massive. But also the stigma that comes with OCD is actually, they say on average, it takes 12 to 15 years for people to be diagnosed with OCD. And that's because of the lack of the public understanding, the stigma and the misdiagnosis. And I'm going to give you an example of this. When I've worked at South West London and St George's NHS Trust, so I've piloted a project to work with patients on CECO wards. So these are patients that struggle with OCD and body dysmorphia. Some of the patients present with paedophilia OCD, harm OCD. They present with sexual orientation OCD, existential OCD, and these are obsessions and fears that are crippling them in their heads. And I often say to people, how many people could come forward to talk about their worst thoughts, let alone if you have fears you're a paedophile? That doesn't make you a paedophile, but that's the simple, crippling fear of being a paedophile. And it's actually really important for people to understand, actually, even within the SEND population, actually, that there's very strong links of OCD and autism, really strong links of OCD and Tourette syndrome, really strong links with also OCD and ADHD. So it's a lot more common than people think.
It's interesting, the bit you've talked about and focused on more than I've ever even thought about is the fear or that inside thing. So when we see someone who kind of locks their door at night, then unlocks it, then locks it again, then unlocks it, then locks it again, then checks it, walks off, checks it again. It's not that they're, I enjoy this pattern of they're scared someone's going to break into their house and they want to be safe. So we're seeing them just repeating an action, but they're doing that because they're scared. They have that fear.
Yes. So that's also how my OCD presented. So my fear wasn't only that people would break in, but my fear was that I did something wrong and that I would have burnt the house down and I've got all this responsibility. So a lot of OCD in some ways can be described as misfiring virtues. So the idea you're so worried that something happens, you take on this extra load, this extra responsibility, and it's not as easy to just put it down. For a lot of people, and we see this a lot, for example, with ADHD and autism, we obviously describe it as dysregulation, or we describe it as, an inattentiveness with ADHD or repetitive behaviors. But we know typically, for example, with autism, there's a lot of rigid thinking. It has to be a lot of routine, predictability, and sameness. Whereas with OCD, it actually adds another rigid, ritualistic thinking, which can quite often be driven by fear, or the fear something bad would happen. So it's so much more than people could understand. And maybe it would help you if I told you how my OCD presented. So my OCD started with health anxiety. I had this obsessive fear that I would have got HIV or an STI, and I would cancel all my plans in a day and run straight away to the sexual health clinic just to make sure that I didn't have it. And no matter the amount of times you showed me the test results, I just couldn't believe it. There was just something in my body, the way my body was firing, that meant I listened to what was going on in my head and I couldn't believe what was on here. And that happened for a very long time. It even got so bad, I spent £300 to get a same-day sexual health test just to prove I didn't have it. Then that fear migrated onto checking doors, making sure the cooker was off, because I had this fear that I'd burn the house down. Then mine moved on to sexual orientation, which was the fear that I was gay. And I'm very transparent in my journey that a lot of this is embedded in a lack of cultural awareness and a cultural understanding, which is another layer that really helps, which really stops people from accessing treatment from particular communities. So I grew up in a very, what I call the three C's, conservative, Caribbean, Christian household, where we had this deeply entrenched fear as a result of Christian fundamentalism, the fear of being gay. And I found out my half-brother was gay, but I didn't know this at the time. But I was so terrified of being gay, I did everything in my head to try and prove that I was straight. So watching copious amounts of porn, whether that was eating foods in particular to make sure I had the right erections. Like, there's a lot that was happening. And these are things that people don't talk about with OCD. They're absurd. They are ridiculous, but it's not as easy for these individuals to put down. And I started having fears of harm. So I had fears of hitting people. And something people don't talk about with OCD actually is your nervous system feels like you're firing. It feels like you're going to hit someone, but it feels like an urge. It feels like a reflex, but it doesn't mean you're going to do that. It's a misfiring part of your brain. And this is another thing that patients with OCD or people with OCD don't get to talk about, because it's hard to get people to understand that, you know, I've got fears I might punch up my mum. I've got fears I might hit the grandmother and the lady in front of me. And it's funny to talk about, but when you live with OCD, it's just so hard to put into words how real it feels. And this is something sufferers will talk about, is that OCD feels so real. And now combine that with ADHD and autism, and you're just compounding the layers of struggle or the layers of difficulty. Then my fear then moved on to the fear of depression, the fear of suicide. So another way OCD presents is through very vivid images. So I started having images of myself jumping off of a bridge, and I could see it visually. I could genuinely see it. And I became crippled with fear. I locked myself inside my house. I lost friends. I lost finances. I lost my job. I lost everything as a result of OCD. OCD is not the joke that we think it is. And that's also why adding that layer of stigma and shame and the lack of public understanding is what further entrenches the shame for patients or people with OCD. I keep referring to people as patients because of how much work I do in the NHS with people and how much work I do with students in schools and colleges and universities. And there's been a common consensus, which has been no one comes into these schools and educational settings to talk to these students about OCD. We understand autism. We understand ADHD. We understand anxiety. We understand depression. We understand dyslexia and dyspraxia and dyscalculia, but we still don't understand OCD. And I think it's because OCD is still viewed as something people want.
It's really strange. So obviously listening to your story, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with being gay, but it's the story you were told as a child, that Christian view of it. It's like this, you have these negative thoughts and then you're worried you're going to fulfill it because you've seen it happen. This is a prediction. This is my future. This is what is going to happen. And I don't want that. So I've now got to stop it. It's in my head. That's what it is. And yes, if you are an OCD cleaner, it probably looks lovely. Your house is amazing. But what is the fear you are fighting? What is the fear? What is the germs? What vision have you seen in your head that you are fighting against being? That's kind of what you're saying is this vision, which you think is going to happen in this context you're talking about. I've got to make sure that doesn't happen. So I might lock myself away, or I might do these behaviors to make sure that I'm safe.
Yes, or you do these behaviors to prove that you are not who you think you are in your head. And if I can give you an example. So there was a patient I've been working with on the ward, and a lot of these are really young people, right? I'm really privileged and lucky to say that I've been in recovery for OCD for a while. So I was working with this young lady. She has a big fear of contamination. So she's scared that if she doesn't clean things or doesn't make sure things are okay, that people around her will get sick and they will die and it will be her fault, right? So one of her exposures, and to help people understand what exposures are, it's part of ERP treatment, which is exposure response prevention. So you have the obsession, you do this particular exposure to get people to understand that you need to sit with this anxiety and that you teach the brain you don't have to keep reacting. So this patient in particular, she had to put her hands down the toilet. And it's bizarre to people because until you come onto a ward and see this with patients, you don't understand how much they suffer. So she had to put her hands down the toilet to get her to realize that the contamination wasn't as bad as she thought. And she had to sit with this uncertainty. And this is what I also say with OCD. It's an intolerance, an allergy to uncertainty. Most people in life want answers, but particular to someone with OCD, this uncertainty is like an allergy in their system. It feels so cripplingly real. So I said to the patient, I'm going to put my hands down the toilet with you. And I'm someone who struggled with OCD as well, contamination OCD. So I put my hands down the toilet and she was so shocked that I was able to do it. But it's to show her that she can recover. So for someone, it's not, other people that maybe don't have OCD think it's that easy, but wait till they have to do it themselves. Now add that to another layer of this sensory sensitivity these patients are already having. It's harder than people could even imagine. So for myself, that really struggled with, I struggled also with the fear that I was going to harm people. So some of my exposures meant I had to be around some of my female friends. And that's because I had the fear that I could sexually assault them. So I had to sit with what was going on in my body and learn to accept that it's okay for me to have these thoughts, these feelings, these sensations, but it doesn't mean I'm going to act on them. And this is why I'm saying to people, and I'm saying quite often on this podcast and anywhere that I am, that OCD and ADHD and autism, it's a struggle to regulate your emotions. But the intense anxiety you get from an OCD trigger, combined with the low frustration tolerance of ADHD, combined with the sensory sensitivity of autism, it's a cocktail that is incredibly hard. And it can feel physically and sensorially intolerable for people, which causes more shutdowns, or it can cause more emotional dysregulation, or what people call meltdowns. So it's a lot harder than people think.
So, interesting, you talked about being around your female friends because you had that fear you would sexually assault them.
Yes.
That's not you wanted to. That's not you are likely to. OCD doesn't make you more likely to sexually assault someone, but you've had that thought in your head and you're worried that that's what you're going to do. And you almost certain, and it's like that is what's going to happen. I also like the bit where you said like an allergy to uncertainty, because I know how much most people love that certainty. They like to know where they're working, where they're going on holiday. We love to know everything. Yeah, when something doesn't happen, most of us don't like it. The allergy to uncertainty, I think, really, to me, it helps me understand how it feels. That person, when you see them in the film and they're washing their hands again, their hands are red raw, giving them a cuddle and saying they're there, absolutely meaningless in reality. From what you're teaching me is the fear is still there. They're washing their hands for a reason. Just saying they're there is going to do nothing to get rid of that fear and that what they think is going to happen if they don't wash their hands.
Exactly. And that intolerance to the uncertainty means they don't want to take the risk to perhaps not wash their hands in that situation. Or for me, I didn't want to take the risk by being around my female friends. So I locked myself away. And again, it sounds silly to people, but they can't understand that. And then what I've often said, and I've been part of research to help people understand how different it is for being a young man with this wider societal political context, that the fear you could be a sexual assaulter is already doubly compounded by what's going on in society, where young men are being perceived already as a threat. They're being told that they are guilty until proven innocent. That shame, that stigma, the embarrassment, it makes it so much harder for people to come forward. And this is why I spend so much time advocating within the SEND population that OCD is not a neurodiversity. It's a mental health condition that is crippling, and it generally is debilitating for the sufferers.
And it's interesting. So again, I'm just going to touch on that sexual assault. It's one thing is to help understand, but it's also saying you don't want to talk about it, because if I'm talking about sexually assaulting my friends, they're going to believe I'm going to do it. So I now can't even talk to anyone about it, because if I talk about it, they think I'm going to, but I don't want to. Nothing in me wants to, but there's a thought I might. So I think I might, but I don't want to. That's a huge loop. And that bit you just ended on, it isn't a neurodiverse, it is a mental health, because you keep using the term, I'm a recovering OCD. And that really helps you again see what OCD is.
Yes, it's something that requires quite constant management. And again, from a lot of the people I've worked with in in educational settings and in corporations, when they've typically been diagnosed with OCD, or they typically have been diagnosed with autism or ADHD, quite often it coexists. And as I said, just to use that number again, that OCD in autism, quite often in autistic people, can be around 70% or higher, which makes it harder. It makes it harder to diagnose. It makes it more complex in the way it presents, but it makes it so much harder to treat. And I've often said to people, take your worst fear and put that in your mind and put it to this idea that if you do not repeat a particular behavior, that it's going to come true. That's what it's like to live with OCD. The mere presence of the thought terrifies a lot of sufferers to the point they will do anything but become a danger to everyone. And just to make it clear, research also shows again that individuals with OCD, just because they have a particular kind of thoughts or sensations or what feels like urges, does not make them more likely to do it. The evidence is conclusive on that. If anything, the evidence has shown they are far less likely to do it because it's so vehemently against their values. It's so against their morals and who they are as a person. They see it as such a disgusting part of their mind that they will do anything to make sure these things don't happen.
But they've had that thought in their mind, which then worries them, and that's where it all comes from. So let's go to a situation of someone who turns the light switch on and off. That may be OCD, but it might be someone who just likes to know the lights are off. So that's not really an indicator, is it, in my head?
So one of the key signs with OCD that I've quite often noticed is, do they feel like something really bad is going to happen if they don't do it in a particular way? Does it have to feel right? Does it have to be in a particular order? And what happens if they don't do those things? Is it crippling anxiety? Is it crippling sadness? Does it feel compulsive? Does it feel like they have to do it? They cannot not do it? Is it moving? Is it migrating? And again, just to make people aware, I'm not clinical in any way, shape, or form. I have worked as a former trainee children's wellbeing practitioner in the NHS, so I've treated low-level CBT, and I've seen the way OCD has presented in people. But it's very clear, you have to find out, is there a compulsive element? Is there the idea that if they don't do it, something really bad is going to happen? Is there this inflated sense of responsibility? And those are some of the ways that quite often you can see, is this something that potentially could be OCD? And people do have OCD traits. Having a trait of OCD is not the same as having OCD. The same way having, not being able to focus doesn't mean you have ADHD. It's not the same. You can have traits of it. It doesn't mean that's what it is. Having a full-blown diagnosis is very different. And I really put that out there as a disclaimer to people, because I've often said that the commodification of mental health, which is, has been a problem because we've made mental health so widely accessible. We've made neurodiversity so widely accessible. But because of the commodification, the easing of talking about things, in some ways it's trivialized what neurodiversity and mental health actually are. So it's very important to make sure we know there's a key distinction between having traits and having the diagnosis.
So my nephew used to have it. His lunch was, he had a routine. So he'd make his sandwich, he'd go to the fridge, he'd get out his cheese slices, he'd make his sandwich. He had a lovely routine. They were out of cheese slices. So my sister bought a block of cheese, same cheese, but he could cut it. Couldn't cope with that because it was a different routine. But it's the why, the bits you were just talking about there, would say, actually, he's not scared of it. It's just not his normal routine. There's no fear around it. There's no that bit all behind it, which would make it the OCD. It was, he had a rigid routine he liked, but it was what was the reason, what was that behind it is, I think, the difference between having a rigid routine and OCD.
Potentially. With OCD, we quite often would say it's about ritualistic thinking. So, as you said, and you made a very key distinction, that he wants things in a particular routine. And I think most of us like things in a particular routine. I typically eat the same thing every day, and it's just because it makes my life easier. I don't like to have to think so much about what I'm eating. It's less cognitive overload for someone like me. But the ritualistic thinking is different. So I'll use myself again as an example, which a lot of students I've worked with can relate to. The fear that I was going to become schizophrenic or have psychosis, I avoided watching anything with schizophrenia or psychosis. I avoid talking to my friends with schizophrenia or psychosis. Any sound that sounded very different to what I was used to, I felt like I might have been imagining things. I felt like I was hearing things. So I was finding everything to prove that somehow this fear was potentially going to come true. So again, ritualistic thinking versus liking things in a particular order or routine doesn't always signify OCD, or it's the compulsiveness, it's the ritualized thinking around it. So again, some of the patients I've worked with, they have to do things in a particular number. They feel like a number could be a particular bad number. So again, sounds ridiculous, but until you live in the mind of someone with OCD, it's not that easy to give up. And again, I keep reiterating this, compounded that with rigid thinking and autism, inattentive lack of focus in ADHD, and emotional dysregulation in both, it just further compounds this. And this is why I've said in schools, in colleges and universities, we need to do more to get people to understand OCD, because I truly believe the undiagnosed amount of people potentially with OCD is far higher than we could even comprehend.
So you've mentioned kind of things that you've kind of gone through as an adult. You've talked about how it takes currently 12 to 15 years due to the lack of information to kind of really diagnose. So what would, apart from lining pencils up, which is obviously the only OCD identifier, what would kind of OCD look like? Is it those things that we're typically knowing, that like those rigid things, but then going into the whys? Is it that sort of stuff you're looking for in schools?
So I would say in schools, it's looking at what's going on. What, as you said, why do they feel like they have to do things in a particular kind of way? Is it that inflated sense of responsibility? Are there things they feel like they absolutely cannot do, that it's way too much for them? Is there a slight, maybe a hierarchy they have to live up to? Is there a routine they have to follow? Are there things they're avoiding because of particular thought or behavior? Are they checking? Are they doing things like count? People can do, and this is something that's really interesting, just because someone's not doing what is physically outward doesn't mean they're not doing it in here. So I've struggled with something called pure O, which is not a scientific term, but it just means purely obsession, which means mainly in the head, which is what we would often regard as mental rituals. So it's just all mentally. So as I said, when I was scared of something, no one would know what was going on. I would be all up in here. So something else you really need to look for is, are they struggling with staying present in the moment? Are they really struggling with focus? Are they catching up on things? What's going on in their world that's stopping them from engaging with the present? Or are they isolating themselves? Are they only doing things in a particular kind of way? These are some of the things I've often said in schools we really have to look out for.
So it's not, you can observe something, but that is literally give you 20%. It's those conversations. It's that having that why, what's going on, asking those conversations, what happens if I don't. That's the sort of thing you really need to find out if it is OCD-ic. Would that be the correct term for something which is...
Yeah, I suppose it'd be like OCD-ish, maybe. I suppose it's about obviously being very careful with our language. And yeah, that's something that's typically what I would say is a great way to start putting some clues together. If you think someone has OCD, refer them to an OCD specialist. It's really important, because the wrong treatment also can wreak havoc, really and truly. It's not about getting psychodynamic therapy. It's about getting the right CBT ERP, which is known as the gold standard, CBT cognitive behavioral therapy with exposure response prevention. So preventing the people from responding in a particular way to their obsessions is another really important. As I said, it's the gold standard for treatment, essentially. There's other types of therapy now coming out, which I can obviously be happy to share with people the resources. But yes, typically, you want to be aware that OCD symptoms don't just present physically, they also present mentally.
I think it's that the mental bit is, from everything you've said, it's that internal thought process, what you think will happen. Whether or not you're sharing it outside, yeah, you probably aren't, because you're worried what people are going to think about you. If you have these thoughts, I must be the worst person in the world. No one should be. You end up in that zone, don't you?
100%. When I was having the thoughts I was having, I believed I was the worst person in the world. I also believed that I was the only person in the world that struggled with those intrusive thoughts. As long as you have a brain, you will have intrusive thoughts. And that's because the brain is a random machine of learning. Your brain does some bizarre things. We've all had bizarre dreams. We've probably all, as I said, had intrusive thoughts. But for maybe yourself and maybe for other people, you maybe haven't really taken notice of it. You've just laughed it off. And that's pretty much it. But for someone with OCD, it's typically like being stuck on a particular gear that you cannot move. And the only way you learn to move it is by doing the right treatment, by learning to dismiss the thoughts, by learning to go towards the things that you're really, really scared of.
I'm going to say it's like watching TV. You got all these good things, but somehow you end up on the horror film. No matter what you want to watch, you're in the horror film. Everyone else seems to be able to walk up, pick BBC News, they watch the news. They pick Film 4, they watch Film 4. You pick CBeebies, I'm in Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yes.
It's that sort of, whatever you're trying to do, that thought is there. And then once you've seen it, it's there and it's not going to go away.
Yes. And I've been very honest with people and very transparent. And it's because I want no one to ever feel like the way that I did when I really struggled in pure silence. I reached breaking point. I became deeply suicidal. I looked for ways out of my existence because of how much I was suffering with the symptoms, the physical symptom, the mental symptoms, how my life became. But yes, it's like being stuck on a particular channel that no matter how much you try to change, it won't go.
And in those situations, do you feel worth saving, worth being helped?
No, most people with OCD will tell you that they don't feel deserving of the treatment. They feel like they're an awful person. They feel like they're the worst person on the planet. And that also is a barrier to treatment. A lot of individuals with OCD are extremely critical on themselves. As I said, that hyper sense of responsibility, they put so much on their shoulders. And one of the core components within treatment, from what I've noticed, is self-compassion, giving themselves that break that they deserve, recognizing that they're not this evil, awful person that they think they are, what their brain is showing them that you're worthy of treatment, you're worthy of help. As cliched as that sounds, you shouldn't suffer for the rest of your life because of thoughts you cannot control. And again, a lot of the things that we've seen in neurodiversity, if we follow the social model of disability, you can talk about the Hollywood dramatized, acceptable forms of your humanity, but you can't talk about what feels like the horrors and the darkest parts of yourself as a human. So self-compassion is really important with patients with OCD because they don't feel like they deserve help. And it's so crucial. And it's one of the biggest turning points in a lot of people's programs and treatments of OCD, that they see themselves as worthy of help.
And it's interesting is if I gave you a list of all the actual horrible things you had actually done, not what you think was horrible, but almost like what any other person said, horrible things you'd done, all your thoughts, but also the horrible things you think you've done, none of those lists would match. What you thought you were, and the horrible person you was probably a really long list. The horrible things you think you did, probably no one else saw it as horrible.
Yeah, and this is something that's really important. It's very common with autism and, again, OCD, black and white thinking, very rigid thinking. It's hard to get a lot of patients or people and students, whoever it is with OCD, especially in the SEND population, to see things in the gray area, to see that there's no such thing as a good person or a bad person. Someone who is what we would understand as mainly good has the ability to do bad things. Does that mean you weigh it up and you say, because they've done bad thing, does it alter the scales? You know, like it's a bit of a ridiculous idea. And compound that now with the wider societal thinking of social media, where we're becoming more tribalized and politicized, it's further cementing black and white thinking. And this is why I say to people, in this short amount of time, I can only give you some of my hypotheses and some of my theories as to why black and white thinking has become so widely accepted. And I think it's because it's easier to think about the world like that. We say to people that, you know, it's nuanced, but we don't recognize that even in the way that we view people, people are nuanced. I often speak about redemption culture. Redemption culture is something I speak heavily about, not cancel culture. And I believe if we created a wider culture of redemption, where people can grow, where people can improve, where people are not defined simply by their mistakes, I believe that could really, really help individuals and patients and people who are suffering and students who are suffering of OCD to see that they deserve a chance to change, but they don't. It's not their fault again. So I think we need to change the wider society to help people to understand. So again, in a lot of the work I do, it's about redemption.
I could go off on what you've just said for probably an hour conversation with you. We listen to respond. We don't listen to understand. Most of our communication is short and quick. Films are much quicker. You used to be able to sit there and really take in a scene what they were thinking. Now that scene's over in a quarter of the sign and it's flashing up and we're on to the next thing. Actually, understanding just isn't happening. One thing I want to touch on. So you talked about the ERP.
Yes, exposure response prevention.
So that is kind of like you're helping them face their fears. I'm going to use that really simplistic language. That is something that comes as part of a process. So if you have a child who has OCD and they're washing their hands, don't stop them washing their hands.
Yes, it's not going to be that easy at all. They have to get the right treatment. It's nowhere near as easy as people think, because you're asking them to do what they feel is impossible without having the right treatment and dealing with their psychology. Dealing with the psychology is going to be the most important part.
Definitely. That's the bit I was heading towards. It's not about, oh, just stop washing, it's fixed. The thoughts are there. The thoughts are making me wash. That's the bit that I need to kind of help with supporting. That's the bit, the fear I have. You need to show me somehow that my fear isn't real, that actually I need to work out and see. I need to It's like, I always find it interesting. My wife always hates my driving. No one else does in the world, just my wife. Everyone else is perfectly happy, my wife. And you see those videos of what my wife thinks my driving is, whatever. Now, you see those things like the woman saved her husband's life 500 times on the way to work this morning by warning him everything. Very typical stuff. But I drive my wife. We've been together for 24 years. I've driven a lot with her in the car. Yet, she hasn't worked out the probability it's going to be a safe journey based on 24 years worth of data. And in my head, it's in that sort of zone. It's however much you prove to me, the thought is there.
Exactly.
I'm a safe driver.
Exactly. And I think that's a great way. I think it's a great analogy that you've used. And I think one of the things that's really important within OCD treatment and to help people understand OCD is, even if it did happen, what suggests it's your fault? What suggests that, it's something you could have controlled? So again, it goes back to that hyper sense of responsibility that even with the rich amount of data, that mere 1%, that mere 0.0.0.0. However many decimal points you want to go, 0.1, whatever, it's not enough with a lot of people that suffer with OCD. It's just the mere presence that is uncertain is enough for them to be crippling.
There's a famous quote: the probability of being killed by a cow can get incredibly low, but it's never zero.
Exactly. And this is why uncertainty, I've often said, is part of the triad. There's three things in life that are uncertain or guaranteed: death, taxes, and uncertainty. Those are the three things I've often said to students. That's exactly what happens in life. And you have to learn to be okay with uncertainty. We all struggle with uncertainty. And this is why I've often said that resilience is a very key component. And it's a lot of what I work with students, post-traumatic growth. So yes, we have trauma, but the mind and the body is a stress-tested system. So what that means is you go to the gym, you lift weights, you have to tear the muscles a little bit. Not a massive tear. I'm not talking about tearing and fracturing. I'm talking about those micro fractures. You rebuild the brain. So what you're also doing with exposure is, in some ways, you're stress testing the system. You're teaching them that you can retrain your system. You can retrain your nervous system. You can move past your fear and learn to understand you can get through that. So it's very, very important to understand we all struggle with uncertainty, but as individuals with OCD, it's like an intolerance to uncertainty. It's an allergy to uncertainty.
No, I'm quite, in my head, I'm quite curious of somebody who has, I'm going to say, a germaphobe type thing and always washing and worried about being ill if I don't wash my hands. And then 2020 COVID came along. Did that person suddenly become, I told you so, I knew this was going to happen? Or did they become, well, actually, I got through it and my worst fear happened and I'm fine?
So again, this could be where they are in their treatment plan, maybe. It could be if they've got treatment. But I know during COVID, OCD rates went up, germophobia also went up because the whole world was on high alert with essentially the fear of being sick. So contamination, like it's a really big thing for people. We were told in the media that everything you did ran a risk. Everything that you did was terrifying. You couldn't be within 2 meters of people. So for a lot of people, it made them more hypervigilant. And I think that's a great way to help people understand. It's a hypervigilance with the fear of contamination, the fear of getting sick, the fear of making people sick, the fear of doing things in the right way or in a particular kind of way. So yeah, I think it's a great way. And COVID, it was a time where I saw people really, really struggle. When I first shared my story, and I genuinely mean this, thousands of people reached out to me. I've been on Talk TV speaking to Trisha Goddard, and she went off script and spoke to me about she's also struggled with OCD. And I'm more than happy to post all of this and let your viewers know and let them see the evidence. But so many people, famous, struggle with OCD. George Ezra struggles with OCD, Leonardo DiCaprio, Jessica Alba, Justin Timberlake. One of my favorite UFC fighters, Nathaniel Wood, has also spoken about struggling with OCD. It's far more common than people realize. But yes, COVID and particular events in society have really spiked OCD symptoms.
Again, no one wants to talk about it because generally, I'm going to say being that fear of germs is, yeah, I can talk about that. That's almost socially acceptable.
Yes.
But sexual assault, suicide, killing, anything in that zone, no one's going to hear me talk about this. I will lose my friends. I will lose my job. I will lose everything. I don't want to do any of it, but the thoughts are there and I'm worried I am, but I definitely don't want that whole thing. That's going to be, that's horrible to deal with, which means you deal with it on your own.
Exactly. And what I think is really important to understand with that actually is not many of us anyway could talk about our intrusive thoughts. How many of us could have a good laugh or have a good joke? And yes, there's, now being a lot of things on the internet where there's this joke on the internet, which is when your intrusive thoughts win, or obsessive-compulsive Christmas disorder. People just make jokes and trivialize that, which again stops people from coming forward. But to help people really comprehend how hard it is to talk about it, there was a story of someone that my therapist made me aware of. A teacher was struggling with pedophilia OCD. So again, how many people could you come and talk to about having pedophilia thoughts? You can't talk about that. She spoke to her workplace about it. Her workplace fired her. She took them to court and won in the tribunal to explain to them that what she was struggling with was OCD. And it's sad to say there's real world consequences and there's real world, examples that make people afraid. But I don't want that to stop people with this in the SEND population and students coming forward. You deserve the help. You need the help. Just because you have the thought and you have the fear does not mean you're going to act on it. And I really want practitioners, and if there's people, whoever is students listening to this, to realize that you are not a monster from having these thoughts. It does not make you a monster. And I really want to reiterate that. Just because the world does not understand doesn't mean that there's not pockets and communities that don't understand. I'm part of communities that understand.
I think I'm going to end it there because to me, that's a great place to end it on. You are not a monster. The thoughts are there, but that doesn't mean you're going to do it, and you're not alone.
Absolutely. And this is why I've often said in my work, which has been my catchphrase or slogan, call it what you will, is OCD has been the worst thing to ever happen to me. And I've been determined to be the worst thing to ever happen to OCD. And I really want to leave the world in a better place than I found it. I don't want anyone, especially students, to really sit there and think they don't deserve help. These are you deserve it. And I can't say it enough. You deserve help. Please feel free to reach out to me. I'm always open to have a conversation. If you want to bring me into your educational settings to help develop treatment plans or to tailor programs or to deliver keynotes, please, I'm more than happy to come in and do that.
And it is really interesting, going right to the beginning, what is OCD? The actions I saw are kind of OCD, might not be, but it's the thoughts, the fears, that what's going on inside you, that's the OCD part. The actual action is a manifestation of what that looks like, but actually it is all kind of the worst part of it is the internal part.
Absolutely.
So, as Shaun just mentioned, you can get in contact. And as always, all of Shaun's contact details, links to his website, his Instagram, 2 of his TED Talks, and also an article in the Metro newspaper. So all of those links. And it's one of the things when you actually think, again, this whole podcast has been really enlightening for me. I've learned so much. And I had a skim read of your article, OCD Convinced Me I Was a Rapist. It's dark, and then you sit there, and again, you've got to separate a thought and an action and the person. They are not, the thought does not lead to the action, and that is not the person. It's this weird thing where the thoughts are there, the action doesn't want to happen, and the person definitely doesn't want it to happen. So it can be really dark reading, can be quite harrowing, but we need to understand, just because the thought are there doesn't mean anything else will happen.
Absolutely. And that's really important to understand. Having particular kind of thoughts do not make you a monster. They do not make you a bad person. Your brain is a strange creature. And as I said, as you also said, I've written articles in Men's Health as well, where I was sharing it to help other men also understand what OCD is and to hopefully help them come forward. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about something that means a lot to me. And it's something I have really struggled with, and I want people to also know that recovery is possible.
Saying really enjoyed it. I've learned a lot. I know anyone listening about this will probably have a completely new view of what OCD really is, rather than just sorting pencils or things like that, actually what is going on. So thank you for educating us all. And I said, all the information Shaun shared with me are in the show notes. And as always, you'll find the show notes wherever you listen to the podcast, or also on the SENDcast website. And if you want to get in touch, let us know your thoughts, suggest topics, or anything else, please send an email to hello@thesendcast, or contact us via one of our social media channels. Here at B Squared, we've been helping schools since 1997 to support children and young people with SEN. We have been breaking down curriculums and frameworks into smaller steps before P-levels ever existed. Connecting Steps, our assessment software, is our biggest product. It can be used to celebrate progress for a wide range of students, from the most complex to young people working towards independence. And EverSense is our evidence for learning platform and parental communication tool. And it helps to bridge the gap between parents and school. We want good communication, which goes both ways. And as well as this podcast, we also have our SENDcast sessions, which are online CPD all around SEND. Visit the B Square website or click on the meeting link in the show notes to book a meeting with me to take you through our products and how they can help you. So thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the SENDcast. It's goodbye from me.
And I'll see you all soon.
Cheers. Bye.